let me start by saying you guys are poised at a very important point in your development as a region. It was not surprising to me, although it may have been surprising to you, that you were tied for third, or third in our creativity index ranking. You have had a long legacy of investing in technology, particularly around your great colleges, research institutes, and universities. You've always been a place where talented and creative people wanted to be. And I know, although some Americans don't know, that you've always been a very open and tolerant place. You've had large waves of immigration, that's how you were built. But you've also been open to people of different lifestyle, ages, and sexual orientation. So it didn't surprise me. Let me tell you that I am not a student of things like tolerance or arts and culture or things like that. I came to those things as a student of economic growth, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. How you can make the San Diego region broadly a more economically competitive, innovative, technology growth-oriented region. And let me tell you how I came to that point. I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1987 to take a position at a university that is in some ways comparable to UCSD. We're strong in data storage, we're strong in IT, we're strong in software, we're strong in communications and wireless, we're strong in entertainment technology. You add all the bio and medical stuff to that. But there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of respect and rivalry between the two universities. Well, the idea at Carnegie Mellon and the idea in Pittsburgh in the late 1980s, as you know, Pittsburgh took an enormous economic hit in the early 1980s. We lost 150,000 jobs with the decline of steel and heavy manufacturing industries. And we lost, over the past 3 or 4 or 5 decades, about half our population. So the idea at that point was, how would you re-stimulate, how would you rejuvenate, how would you revitalize a region that took that kind of economic hit? And the idea, not dissimilar from the idea you have around here, was to hook up the great university research capability at Carnegie Mellon, where I teach, and the University of Pittsburgh, and particularly its world-class medical complex, to our regional economic development capabilities. We created one of the first high technology councils in the country, the Pittsburgh High Technology Council. We created an entrepreneurial assistance program called the Enterprise Corporation of Pittsburgh and hired a fellow who was a famous entrepreneur and venture capitalist in Silicon Valley to run it. We set up an entrepreneurship program at our business school. We set up one of the nation's first premier and foremost research and development partnerships, the Ben Franklin Innovation System Partnership. And we set up probably one of the first and certainly one of the most aggressive technology transfer and commercialization units at our university. I was hired to run something called the Center for Economic Development at Carnegie Mellon and to help with those tech transfer and commercialization efforts. Well, you may know something about Carnegie Mellon. You may have gone there. You might have friends had gone there. You might have kids or nieces or nephews who've gone there. Typically, we rank in the top 3 in computer science. And in software fields, software development, software engineering, computer and software engineering, we typically rank first. We've also been a place that has generated a ton of spin-off companies. I'm not going to go down the list of the 150 or so. I'll just give you a few. One of the companies, founded by 2 Carnegie Mellon graduates and a guy from Berkeley, is named Sun Microsystems. Didn't locate in Pittsburgh. It located in the Silicon Valley. My colleague, Rick Rashid, who I started at the university with, is the chief technical officer at Microsoft. His peer at Apple is from Carnegie Mellon. Chief technical officer at Red Hat, the open source software company, is a Carnegie Mellon grad. Well, the idea was to take that technology and talent and somehow encourage it to spin off from the university and land in our community, to spur regional economically competitive growth. Well, in the early 90s, we thought we hit our home run. With the birth of what was then known as the World Wide Web, what we now know as the Internet, we had developed critical capabilities in Internet search processes. The company that we developed in our computer science department, I'm sure you know their name. I'm sure you use their technology. The company's name is Lycos. By the way, the other one, Google, the CEO of that company, is one of our alumna too, Eric Schmidt. We invested in the company. We supported it with research and development. We found the local venture capital to start the company. We actually found them a very attractive brick loft townhouse building down the road from the university, and we spun the company off. The company was doing exactly what you want a company to do. It was experiencing an exponential growth curve, growing by leaps and bounds every week, adding servers, adding technology, adding people, developers, and jobs. Well, by this time, the clock had turned to 1994, and I told you I had started at Carnegie Mellon in 1987, and if you know anything about the mathematics of university life, you know that 7 years is a magic number. No, we have a 9-year tenure clock at Carnegie Mellon, so it wasn't quite that magical, but it does make you available for a sabbatical leave. So like most academics, I went and I took my sabbatical leave, and I marched off to Cambridge, to the mecca of academic life, Harvard University, where I took up a visiting position in science, technology, and policy at the Kennedy School of Government. The Kennedy School is a marvelous place. Certainly, the facilities are much better than mine were at Carnegie Mellon. I had a wonderful office with a view of Cambridge and Boston and Charles. But there's one particular thing about the Kennedy School. They have their own private caterers that come complete with a great espresso bar. So when you go into your office in the morning, at Carnegie Mellon, you can't even get a cup of mud. You have to schlep it down from the coffee store in the corner. But they'll serve you a fresh brewed espresso. So I took my cup of fresh brewed espresso and my Boston Globe, and I went up to my office, and I opened the Boston Globe on a day in 1995 that I will forever remember. And I opened the Globe to the headline that read, "Lycos to move to Boston." And that event sticks with me to this day, because it forced me to reconsider everything I had written about, because I had written about how if you want to spur technology-based economic development, you find some entrepreneurs and you put them together in a group and they will magically do it and get the venture capital if you just support them with research and development. Everything I had written about, everything I had taught my students, 100 years of research in my field, because in this field of economic development, there are 3 great truths. There are 3 commandments, right? We all know them. If you want your region to grow, what you have to do is create jobs. If you need to create jobs, there's only one way to do it. You have to go out and find companies. And the 3rd commandment, which is our kind of dirty little secret of economic development, is the way you get the jobs and find the companies is you hand over a gigantic bribe. You pile up money as high as you can in the forms of tax abatement and financial incentives and infrastructure improvement, and you hand it over to the company, and that's called, in most communities, economic development. Well, I got on the phone, and I called my friends at Lycos. I called the people I know at Carnegie Mellon. I put 2 or 3 of my students on the case. Why was Lycos moving to Boston? Boston offered nothing in the way of financial or tax abatement. They weren't building any great new infrastructure for Lycos. In fact, nobody from the mayor's office or the economic development department talked to the folks at Lycos. Lycos was moving an entire operation that we had invested in, created, the research and development support. The top technical people were all in Pittsburgh. They were moving from Pittsburgh to Boston. Why? Why were they going? And the answer that came back shocked me and forced me to rethink and reconsider everything I thought I knew. They were moving to Boston to get access, in their words, to a large and critical mass of talented, highly educated, skilled, and creative people that were already in Boston. Technical people, management people, marketing people, design people, people of all sorts that were already living in Boston and could be mobilized. I think they're the community that ranks near you, by the way. Sorry. They were moving there to get access to the people in a stunning and ironic reversal. The people weren't moving to the jobs. The jobs were moving to the people. And that's when I thought there was some big problem in my field and something that I had to begin to think about and unpeel and unpack and begin to talk about because nobody else was. Instead of the people moving to the jobs like they were supposed to, the jobs are moving to the people. So I asked myself this question. Maybe we have our eyes on the wrong ball. Maybe the question isn't how to encourage or incentivize companies to locate. Maybe the really deep question in economic growth is why do we, people, choose the places we do to live and work? A question that I'm sure resonates on the minds of most people who've chosen to live in San Diego and migrated here from other parts of the country and the world almost every day. Why do we choose the places we do to live and work? And how do we as people influence economic growth? And the answers to that question over 5 years of doing the research and the writing that led to this book, The Rise of the Creative Class, literally shocked me and shocked many of the people who read and reviewed and continue to report on the book. So let me tell you in 3 or 4 easy-to-remember principles what are the key themes of the book. The first point in the book is that economic growth is a much more complex, yet in many ways a much more simple and easy to understand process than we typically think. Most economists believe, as I've said, that companies cause economic growth. If you have a critical mass of companies and investment in capital and equipment, you will grow. The leading theory of economic growth, it's sometimes called the new growth theory, adds a wrinkle to that. And I'm sure it's a wrinkle that you know well in San Diego. And in fact, much of your economic development effort over the years has been oriented to. That new growth theory says that not just companies drive economic growth, but technology drives economic growth. If you have a stock of research and development, if you invest in technology, if you have a lot of scientists and engineers in your community, you will grow. Well, I thought about this for a little while. And I thought about my hometown of Pittsburgh. We were arguably the most research and development intensive town of the early 20th century. In many ways, we were kind of like a Silicon Valley of aluminum and electrical equipment and steel and locomotive engines and railroad train parts and even chemicals and plate glass. We had early venture capitalists like the Mellons who invested in these companies and actually moved them from other parts of the country. We had like 24 research and development headquarters of major companies. We had some of the biggest agglomerations of semiconductor engineers and computer scientists in the world. Yet our region declined for 5 straight decades. So technology may be important, it may be critical, it may be necessary, but by itself it's insufficient to drive economic growth. So what I thought, and what I argued, what I kind of hypothesized, is that technology alone isn't enough. That economic growth comes from a much more basic factor, and that factor I called human creativity. That the places that grow and develop economically over long periods and have a sustainable economic edge are the ones that tap and mobilize and harness human creativity in all its forms. Certainly technological creativity, innovation, and invention. But you need to combine that with economic creativity. You need to have a thriving group of entrepreneurial talent that can take that technology and be creative with it economically and turn it into companies. But you also need artistic and aesthetic and design creativity and civic and political creativity. And when all those forms of creativity come together in a place for any particular reason whatsoever, that place begins to grow propulsively. From Athens to Rome to Venice to Florence to London to Paris to Berlin to New York, and now the great conurbation on the West Coast in California, stretching from San Francisco down right here to San Diego. The reasons for that growth has always been the flourishing of creativity broadly defined. Now, people sometimes say to me, well, Rich, we just had a little debate with a great fellow who lives up the road named Joel Kotkin. You probably know him. If you want to see the debate, they ran it in my hometown paper first in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It's on the website, creativeclass.org. And Joel said, he posed the question that many people say, well, Rich, how do you explain Silicon Valley? Isn't that where all the nerdy, geeky, button-down engineers live who want to avoid the hurly-burly, wacky, creative climates of these urban centers and all the other things you write about? Well, I just always write back the same thing. Where's Silicon Valley? Well, it's in your home state of California. And where exactly in California is this Silicon Valley? Well, on a map, you would have the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood here, and you would have the Monterey Peninsula there, and smack dab in the middle would be this place called the Silicon Valley. And what were those people? And what do we know about the Haight-Ashbury? What do we know about these communities? Well, we have the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, the Mamas and the Papas, my personal favorite, Country Joe and the Fish, of course, the literary innovators of Monterey, and all of that for years and years, the Monterey Pop Festivals, which introduced people like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin to broad popular audiences, a place where every crazy person in the world migrated. You know it, you live in California. It's where all my crazy friends went, to San Francisco. And what did these guys who made a computer really look like? Do we remember? Can we image back to 1972? Gates and Allen, Jobs and Wozniak, with hair down to their shoulders and ripped blue jeans and Birkenstock sandals and tie-dyed T-shirts. And I always ask the question, friends like Joel and others, can you imagine Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak? I'm not going to pick on San Diego. I'm not going to pick on anybody else's. I'll just pick on mine. Imagine these guys coming up with their box, a personal computer, to the offices of Mellon Bank in downtown Pittsburgh in 1972. How far do you think they would have gotten? You think they would have gotten past the security guard? Get those hippies out of here. But in Silicon Valley, they were just normal, innovative, creative people who were hanging posters on the wall, naming their company after the Beatles recording studio, programming, Beatles music and Jimi Hendrix music on their machines, phone hacking at night. They were just normal people. And Donald Valentine from Sequoia Capital, the venture capitalist who financed them, told me 10 years ago, he said, I didn't care. I said, you really gave money to a guy who didn't wear shoes? He's like, I didn't care about shoes. I don't care about the shell. I only care about what's inside the shell. And that's the point, the mobilization of human creativity. Well, there's another point that sometimes comes up in response to my book, and people say, well, Rich, your book's about these elite, yuppie, high-tech science and engineer types. What does it have to do with the rest of my economy? The manufacturing people, the service people, all of the people who toil and make our lives better. And the argument I say is that our whole economy is becoming creative, not just this technology sector. Everything we do, everything we buy, everything we use. The creative class that I talk about in the book, scientists and engineers, technology people, artists, musicians, poets, novelists, journalists, educators, researchers and developers, and knowledge-based professionals in the law and finance and healthcare fields. They rose. We are the great growth sector of the economy. We were less than 5% of the workforce in 1900. In 1950, we're still less than 10% of the workforce. Manufacturing composed about 50% of all workers. In 1980, we were about 15% of the workforce. The past 20, 25 years, we've grown from 15% of the workforce to more than a third. There's more people in this creative part of the economy than there are people who work in manufacturing in the United States. Let me give you another fact that's not in the book. With my students, we broke down the economy into three sectors: the service sector, the manufacturing sector, and the creative sector. We looked at the economic impact of all three in terms of the wages and salaries paid to people who work in them. The creative sector accounts for more than half of all wages and salaries paid in the United States, $1.7 trillion. In your economy, or in Pittsburgh's economy, or in San Francisco's economy, or in Boston's economy, you can guess that on average, about 2/3 of your entire regional economy, the San Diego metro region, 2/3 of the San Diego metro region is composed of creative sector work. That's how important this sector of the economy, science, engineering, technology, information, bio, robotics, automation, and arts, and culture, and entertainment, and the knowledge-based professions is. It is our future. So creativity is the source of economic wealth generation. Creativity is the source of growth. Well, where does this creativity come from? What is the natural resource? What is the raw material? What is the factor of production? What is the input? Well, for the first time in human history, it doesn't come from anything material. I mean, think about the nature of this transformation. Throughout all of human history, our economic wealth came from the ground. It came from natural resources, or fertile soil, or having access to ports for trade, or amassing giant factory complexes, and using physical labor to transform raw materials. All of that is no longer critical. The critical input, the critical factor of production, the critical differentiator for your regional economy is only one thing: people, us, human beings. We are the economic driving force of the creative age. For you, your future will be determined much more by the capability to mobilize and harness the talents of creative people, to attract creative people, to retain creative people, to harness the talents of everyone you have to make more creative and interesting and value-added goods. Well, you might be saying, well, Florida seems like an interesting guy. He has a couple of good ideas, but he's just a professor at Carnegie Mellon. Let me give you an example, or give you a sense of this from someone you might respect or take more seriously than me. 2 years ago, I got to address the National Governors Association in Washington, D.C. at their annual meeting. And I was really nervous. First, I hadn't done much public speaking. Second, I hadn't written a book. So nobody knew who the heck I was. And I'm going there to address 50 governors. And I was really quaking in my boots. But my job that day was made very, very easy because the person who spoke before me was the CEO and chairperson of Hewlett-Packard. And what she says to the governors resonated with me and resonates with me to this day. She said, governors, keep your tax breaks, keep your financial incentive packages, keep your giant infrastructure projects and all the cloverleaf exchanges you want to build for us. When we make a decision on where to put an HP facility, an R&D facility, an office facility, or a factory, we only have one criteria in mind. We go where the highly skilled people are. End of story. People are the critical factor of production. And you see, not just for HP. I learned about this as a young boy. Well, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Ever been? If you watch The Sopranos on Sunday night, I used to talk like this. I did. It was really cool to get rid of it. How you doing? Having fun here in San Diego? It's nice with the sun all the time. Beautiful. Hey. Well, that's where I grew up. And my dad, we're Italian-American. My dad was born in the 1920s. And he, like many people of his generation, was forced to leave school. And he was forced to leave school in the 8th grade to help support his family at age 13. And he took up a job in an eyeglass factory. I write about the eyeglass factory in the book. It had a big impact on me. The eyeglass factory was in the ironbound section of Newark, Down Neck it's sometimes called it, bounded by train tracks, all big factory complex, old big brick factories. And like any young boy, well, after my dad went and served in World War II, and he came back, and he went back to work in the eyeglass factory. Met my mom, they got married, had us, Rich and Rob. Two great Italian names, Richard and Robert, by the way. Well, I was a young boy. Like any young boy, you're fascinated by what your dad does. And I'd say, Dad, will you take me to the factory? Could I come with you to work? And sometimes on Saturday when the plant worked overtime, he would relent. And he would say, sure, Rich, you can come with me. And we'd make that drive into the factory, and my eyes were agog. And my dad had worked his way up from a regular worker to a foreman. He was the manager of the whole plant. He'd talk in Italian to the Italians, a little bit in Spanish to the Hispanic and Puerto Rican workers, a little bit in German to the Germans. And I would be looking at the machines and asking him about them. He'd say, Rich, the key to this factory isn't the machines. It's the knowledge and intelligence and the talent of the people who work here. Jack Welch, the CEO of General Electric, later told me the same thing about what he did at General Electric. He said, it wasn't our machines, it wasn't our equipment. Also a working-class guy from Boston. It was the people at General Electric, just like my dad said about the people at Victory Optical. Well, my dad made eyeglasses. And I'll just use eyeglasses to illustrate my point about creativity. Now, my dad's eyeglasses were those kind of black, plastic, you know the kind I mean, the Elvis Costello, Buddy Holly variety. They cost $8 or $9 or $10 in the local optometry store. You can still find, there's a company at Santa Monica, by the way, the only place you would find this, in Santa Monica that still sells these vintage eyeglasses. We found them. They're the big black Elvis Costello clunkers. Cost $8 or $9 or $10 and you wore them to see better. These are my eyeglasses. I don't know if you can see them very well. I know that you also enjoy eyeglasses in San Diego, by the way. These are red magnesium eyeglasses. I bought them in a store in Pittsburgh called Itique. Red magnesium glasses designed by our dear friend Theo of Belgium. When you open the case for my magnesium red Theos, the case says in your face, Theo loves you. And I figure, indeed, Theo must love all of his customers because they don't cost $8 or $9 or $10. They don't cost 10 times $8 or $9 or $10. As you know, here in San Diego, they cost more like 100 times $8 or $9 or $10. I fortunately get the Teo discount. But they're a lot of money. Well, what are you paying for? These are lighter than my father's glasses. There's less material than the black clunkers he made. There's less work. This is probably a completely automated production line. There's not even glass lenses. There's some plastic polycarbonate lenses in here. What are you paying for? You don't see any better. They don't work magic and make my vision any better. You're paying for the creativity in these eyeglasses. Anybody see the Wall Street Journal story, my favorite, on the so-called trophy stove? I know, I'll bet some of you have trophy stoves and trophy backyard grills. Backyard grill would be just as good an example. But the trophy stove, it's that front page personal journal section of the Wall Street Journal, and there's the people sitting behind their new purchase. We don't have many of these in Pittsburgh, but I know you have them in California. It's that blue stove with the words Viking written across the front, Viking. And they have that beautiful polished granite countertop on it. And the guy's dressed like me with his tie off. The woman has her dress with her pearls on her hair pulled back. They're sitting behind it, so proudly admiring it. And there's Chinese takeout containers on the top. You know, it's like the most utilitarian and basic device in all of human history, right? The cooking stove. And we need not talk about Sonoma and Napa and what they've done to the wine industry, but you get the point. Everything. From the clothes we wear, the eyeglasses we use, the handbags and briefcases we carry, the cars we drive, the technology, the arts and culture, the entertainment, all of it is infused with creative content. And still in the United States, we're talking about the threat from low-cost competitors. When the real key is the ability to amass creative and talented people, not just from our region, not just from our country, but from all over the world, and infuse products with this creative content. So that's point number 2. Creativity is the source of economic growth. And this thing called creativity comes from people, which leads me to point number 3. What does this mean for your city, for your community, for your region? What does it mean for your place, for your town? Well, I've thought about this a lot, because that's what I am. I'm a regional developer, economic developer, urban planner, economic geographer. What does it mean for place, to have this creative economy where creativity infuses all of our products and services and comes from people? Well, it means that place, geography, your region, San Diego, has become the critical and most essential economic and social organizing unit of our time. That's what makes each of our jobs much harder, more complicated, and much more important, because we are essentially the CEOs, the stewards, the leaders of this thing called a place. And there's a lot of us here, and there's a lot of us that aren't here. But we are the stewards of the most important economic and social organizing unit of our time. And let me even make this more plain. You might be thinking, well, place isn't the corporation, isn't the company, isn't a business. Business, good old American business, the most important economic organizer of our time. For the past century, absolutely. Past century was the century of the large, vertically integrated company. It was, gee, what's good for General Motors is good for the country. My college girlfriend, I remember the shirt she came home with. I nearly died. It said, GE is me. It was the era when IBM stood for what? I've been moved. You went where the company, you worked for the company for life. For life, you got one. My father worked from the day he was 13, could get a work permit to the day he was 65 and could retire. In Pittsburgh, people handed their jobs down in a steel mill to their kids and their grandkids. What's the average length of stay in a job for an American today? It's less than 3 years. For an American under the age of 30, it's less than 1 year. Well, a company used to do this trick. It used to have this function. It matched a person to a job. It matched lots of people to a job. It matched them to the job like my father for life. So the company matched people to work. What does that today? When a person leaves a job in anywhere from 1 to 3 years, what was Carly Fiorina really telling the governors? What was that Lycos story really about? It's geographic place. It's your community. It's San Diego. That's the critical economic organizing unit. For a company, you provide, as all the people who work in companies and lead companies here know, and that's why you pay to be here, high cost of business. Why are all these crazy companies going to high cost of business locations? Why aren't all these companies in Montana, in Arkansas, in Alabama? Why isn't Pittsburgh being rebuilt from the ground up? Why is everybody packing themselves into New York and Chicago and Boston and San Francisco and San Diego? Something's wrong with the economics. Because what you're going for is to be near that pool of talented and creative and productive people who add to your bottom line through their human resourcefulness and productivity. And people, we're not dumb. I know sometimes people say we are, but we're not dumb. What do we gain from being in a region? We get access to a thick labor market filled with opportunities where we can change our job without having to change where we live. When we did focus groups and interviews with people all over the country, this came up time and time again. When we pick a place to live and work, we want to be in a place where we know the first job is going to go away. We can't go to North or South Dakota. We can't go to Nebraska. It's hard for us to come to Pittsburgh because when the first job goes away, where are we going to get a second or a third or a fourth job? We want to go to a place that has vibrant economic opportunity. So place becomes important for a very basic economic reason, matching people to work and work to people and generating productivity, efficiencies, and competitive improvement by this mixing and matching flexibly of people. But there are other reasons places are important, and let me just tell you a few of them, because they're the ones that capture all the headlines about the book. Well, place has an important role in a person's status. In the old days, when you got on an airplane and people asked you a question, the first question they would ask you is, where do you work? What company do you work for? Remember that T-shirt, GE is me? And you would say, I work for GM or General Electric or Westinghouse or wherever. Now when you get on a plane, people don't ask you that question anymore. They ask you the question, well, where do you live? And let me tell you my story. So place becomes an important part of your status, your personal image and what you project to the world. When I went to school at Columbia University, I lived on 123rd Street in Amsterdam. I lived in Harlem. No, I didn't tell people that. I didn't tell people I lived in New York City. I said proudly, I live in Manhattan. I was at the center of the place status hierarchy. I live in Manhattan, and I gleefully boasted that. I didn't say I live in Harlem or in the university building. Oh, and then when I went to school at MIT and I taught at Harvard and I lived up in Belmont off Route 2 in this little street, I didn't say I live in Belmont. I didn't say I lived in Cambridge. I said I lived in Boston. And as long as there wasn't a New York cabbie around, I was in good shape. And when I get on the plane tomorrow, and somebody asks me, where do I live? I'm going to say, I teach at Carnegie Mellon. I've lived in this city for 15 years. I like it. I like my house. I like my neighborhood. I like my neighbors. I like the people. I'm committed to the city. I love the university I teach in. But still it affects me. And if it affects me in that way, it affects lots of other people. But there are other deeper reasons. Creative people, talented people, have always wanted to be around other creative and talented people. It's a big draw. The mating market, the ability to meet people. I always say, you take two 22-year-olds, you plop them down in the city. You give one a $100,000 job, another one a $50,000 job. You put the $100,000 job kid with no boys or girls around him or her. You put the $50,000 kid around lots of boys and girls their age. Everybody's going to move to the $50,000 job after 2 or 3 years. So just going to be, what's more important to you, your job or your ability to meet a life partner? So creative people want to be around other creative people. They want to be around creative things. They've always have, except there weren't a lot of us. There were just the wacky professors with the berets and the sunny sandals, the goofy inventors, and the artists. And they all lived in like 4 neighborhoods, like Haight-Ashbury, the West Village. But now there's 38 million of us, and we all want that, remember? And with the outdoor recreation, before outdoor recreation became popular, I always say this, can you imagine my father, Lewis, Florida, coming home after a hard day of work? His favorite recreation was Yankees, baseball, Schaefer beer with the opener. Imagine my father putting on his boxer shorts and a pair of PF Flyers or Converse sneakers and running around the block in New Jersey. It would have locked him up. He would have been in Bellevue. Or my mom, Eleanor, you know, putting on her black brassiere and a pair of black hot pants and strapping on roller skates. This is taken for normal behavior in San Diego, isn't it? Well, the wacky professors and the crazy artists, they were always doing yoga and bending and chanting on the floor, right? They were always running around the block. Before you even had running shoes, you'd see these crazy people with hair sticking out of their heads. Oh, I'm getting into health. I'm finding balance. You look at them like, I'm meditating. I remember the first time I heard that word. I said, are you insane? I'm from Jersey. Meditate, meditate. But now everybody does it. And we all go to the gym and work out. Of course, because we're creative people. We need creative stimulation. We work with our heads, not with our hands. My dad worked with his hands and his backs and his legs. He didn't want to go exercise, but we need it. As one of my interview subjects said, we need it to recharge ourselves for a second working day. All this stuff. And in the cultural realm. Not just the old symphony, ballet, and the opera house. Not just the spectator sports. Those are all important infrastructures. And you need to have them. But people want to do as well as watch. They want a music scene and an art scene, and they want great galleries, and they want great restaurants, and they want a happening scene where they can mix and they can mingle. I often say the music scene is one of the most important things you can generate. One of our interview subjects says, I can tell a city by its audio identity. I can hear a city. You think about it. Any great technology center, any world-class technology center, before they were a technology leader, had a great music scene. San Francisco. Before Silicon Valley was even imaged, was a place where you heard new musical sounds. Austin, Texas. What did you know about Austin, Texas? Number 2. One ahead of you. What do you know about Austin, Texas before you ever heard of Michael Dell in that god-darn dorm room? And the other thing, by the way, why do all these people have to drop out of college? Sorry. Can't we have dorm room entrepreneurship 101 in the college? I think it'd be okay. What did you know about Austin, Texas before you knew about Michael Dell, Willie Nelson, Janis Joplin, Stevie Ray Vaughan? They have a statue. When you run on the running path, the statue is not of some great Austin political person, not some great ancient CEO, Robert Barron. No, it's Stevie Ray Vaughan playing his guitar. It's the statue. The great joke in Austin that my friends like to tell when Gwyneth Paltrow was there for New Year's Eve, and I asked them, did you guys see Gwyneth? Was she really, was she interesting? She come to visit Sandra Bullock, who lives there. They said, no. Somebody was trying to take a picture, and Gwyneth Paltrow was on the street, and she was with Willie Nelson, and they tapped her on the shoulder and said, hey, Blondie, will you take a picture of me with Willie? That story, it just shows the reverence for music in that community. Seattle, Washington, home to Microsoft, the most important company, whether you love them or you hate them, of the technology age. Paul Allen makes his money. Co-founds the company with Bill Gates. He's actually building creative communities now. That's what he's doing around South Lake Union. He decides he's going to give something back to his community. He's going to make an investment in the cultural life and civic life of his community. He's going to erect a monument, a museum, a memorial to the person who inspired him. No, it's not the Rockefeller Museum. It's not the Carnegie Museum. It's not the Mellon Museum, because those weren't the people who inspired. What does Paul Allen sink his $150-some million into? The Jimi Hendrix Experience Music Project. We have the same boyhood idol, me and Paul, Jimi Hendrix. Why? Because if a young African-American kid growing up in Seattle could create new musical sounds, could blend blues and rhythm and blues and psychedelic music and popular music, and form his own company, his own studio, Electric Ladyland Studios, and create still more dynamic and interesting sounds, maybe a young, geeky kid with those big Coke bottle glasses named Paul Allen could do the same with his computer code. It wasn't a great robber baron entrepreneur who stimulated Paul Allen. It was an African-American rock and roll musician. So creativity, and secondly, diversity. When we did our focus groups and interviews, when we talked to people all over the country, we talked to people about what they want in a place to live and work. They said, we want a creative place. We want an exciting place. We want a thick labor market. We want great jobs and great people and great peers. We want a place that's diverse. When we go to a city, we look around. We want to see that there's music scenes and art galleries and people on the street and street-level energy. And we want to make sure that people look diverse. that there's different age groups. There's young and middle age and people with kids and grown kids and old people. We want to make sure that they're people of different colors, different races, different ethnicities. We want to make sure that women are in leadership. We look for people who have strange appearances with piercings and tattoos. We want to see signs of a visible gay community. And that one struck me. Why? We want to see artists and culturally innovative people and young people and old people in a visible gay community. So I started to ask. Well, that's the sign of a place that's open to everyone. We want to compete on our talent, on our capability, on how good we are, on what we can do, not who we are, what gender we are, what race we are, what ethnicity. We compete based on merit. We want to get ahead based on merit. That's what we look for in a place that's open to merit-based competition, capability. Well, then I happened to meet a fellow named Gary Gates. I was studying the high-tech workers and the high-tech companies, economic competitiveness, cluster building, pulling the companies together, getting the venture capital. I wrote 2 books on this and scores of articles. I come back from Harvard to CMU, and my friend says, you got to meet Gary Gates. He's finding the exact same conclusions you are. You are working on the exact same subject matter. I said, well, what's Gary working on? Well, they said, he's doing the demography of the gay population. I'm working on high-tech people. He's working on gays. There couldn't be something that's further apart, could there? So I went to see Gary, and Gary and I have become great friends, and he did what he always does, and he would do to you if he was here today. He said, Rich, let me see your list of them high-tech hotspots, those. Oh, and here they are. Oh, it's, what is it again? San Francisco, Austin, San Diego, Boston, and Seattle. You just named 5 of the 10 gayest cities in America. And so Gary and I pondered this. And we've worked on this for 3 years now. Gary's now at the Urban Institute. He's doing great. He has a book coming out on some of this. And the first thing we thought was, oh, here's an easy explanation. Gay people have better taste and do a better job of fixing up houses. So that's easy. Oh, we figured it all out. Gay people go there. They fix the neighborhood up. Rents go up. It becomes a better place. Gary called it the gay fixer-upper effect, but that's the way we thought, well, we had a better theory. We thought, well, if it's 2 gay people partnered, they would have a higher disposable income. And that's true to an extent, but what Gary's found in his book called The Almanac of Gay America, he's a demographer, that a lot of gay people, and you know this because you live in San Francisco, have children. Both because they were formerly in a heterosexual relationship or because they may have adopted. So that didn't work. What we figured out is that this gay index, like the other one, the Bohemian Index, by the way, when the Washington Monthly writes that headline, Why Gays and Rock Bands Matter to Your Economic Future, that sells a lot of books. That headline sells a lot of books. Still waiting for Oprah, but that headline alone sells a lot. Why Gays and Rock Bands Matter to Your Economic Future. What we figured out is this. A place that's open to the gay community, that's open to the artistic community, musicians, poets, art people working artists. A place that allows them to come as well as immigrants. It's open to diversity. And a place that's open to diversity can harness the talent of a lot of different kinds of people. A lot of different kinds of people. But there's also a second factor that's not so commonly understood. A place that allows an art colony to create itself, a music colony to create itself, a gay enclave to develop. There's something in that community, I call it a creative ecosystem, a creative habitat, that you can't really define, but it allows people who might not fit in elsewhere to come to a community, to create resources, to mobilize resources, to network throughout that community, to find support in that community, to be financed, to set up shops and retail businesses, and become part of the community. Isn't that exactly what a high-tech entrepreneur needs in a community? So when we figured this out, a place that had a creative ecosystem, which you see in a thriving arts and cultural community, with working artists and musicians and a great music scene, which you see in a thriving gay community, also has many of the underlying preconditions that allow high-tech entrepreneurs to come from outside, network into the community, and mobilize resources. I call this in my work the 3 T's of economic development. Technology, talent, and tolerance. You need to do all 3 to be a thriving community. Of course, you got to invest in technology, and you need great research institutes and great research universities. You can't do it without it. And you are blessed. You are blessed with a research infrastructure that you've built over the past 4 decades plus, going back to the early founding of Scripps. You need to be a talent magnet. You need to be able to generate talent and attract talent and be a place people want to come. And you got to invest in your talent through education of all sorts. And you got to be open and tolerant. When all three T's come together, you get to be a growing and thriving region. Our panelists will come up in a minute. I want to end on one concluding note. The biggest misinterpretation of the book. The biggest misinterpretation of the book is that this book is somehow about attracting the molecular biologist, the new biotech thinker, the great software engineer, the physicist who's going to reshape the world. And that's worked for you. It's worked for us at Carnegie Mellon in the past. It's not, however, just about attracting the best and the brightest. However important the best and the brightest are, you have to attract them, of course. What my book says is every single human being is creative. That's the key to our competitive future. We can no longer make it alone on attracting that rarefied strata of the great creative geniuses. The Japanese taught us this lesson in manufacturing 20 years ago, and we've got to realize it in this new competition. We thought if we just had the best engineers and the best research and development and treated the shop floor workers like crap and exported all the production to low-wage countries, we'd be fine. If there's defects, who cares? It's a new gizmo. They'll pay for it. They don't care about quality. So we gave them Chevy Vega, sorry. Well, the Japanese, when they started with those Toyotas and Hondas, and they started to beat the bejesus out of us, they realized one thing. Every single shop floor worker was the source of an innovation, a suggestion, continuous improvement, Kaizen. Every single human being is creative. See, creativity is unique. It defies gender, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, lifestyle, and appearance. It comes in virtually every shape and size. You don't know where the next Jimi Hendrix, the next Andy Warhol, the next Bill Gates, the next Steve Jobs is going to come from. And you know what? They're just as likely to come from the street, from the ghetto, from the barrio, from a college dropout, from a high school dropout, as they are for some rarefied research. Now, as important as the research institutes and the symphony halls and the museums and the great institutions are as your infrastructure, you also have to realize the creative power that is in all of your people. That's the key. And finally, we as a country are falling behind fast. We are desperately at risk. We face the greatest competitive challenge of our lives, of the past 5 generations of Americans. This challenge in the creative age, to be the kind of place that attracts and mobilizes a diverse group of creative people, that's bigger than the challenge the Japanese posed in manufacturing. You see what the Canadians are doing? Do you watch them? They're building their cities. They're making their cities great. Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and the small cities. They're developing a strategy to build their cities. They've opened their arms to the world. 50% of all people in Toronto and Vancouver are foreign-born. They've legalized gay marriage. The biggest, smartest talent attraction strategy in quite a long time. That's the kind of threat we face from Canada, from the UK, from Finland, from Sweden, which is opening themselves up as we restrict immigration, as we have a national debate over gay rights, as we cut funding for higher education, we slash funding for R&D, we slash funding for arts and culture. I don't know in the name of what, fighting some unknown threat, when the real threat is that we're going to cut back and move backward on our own principles. Well, thanks very much for listening. Let's have the panel and have some questions.
I've been a great fan of the Olympics and what happened in Salt Lake City a year ago, a little over a year ago, with the Winter Olympics, and what the Olympics did for that community and what it might do for our community if, in fact, we were bold enough to go after the Olympics in now the year 2016. But the best thing that happened to the Salt Lake community was that over a 4-year period, with the aid of the financing of the federal government, state government, and local governments, they completely, and I mean completely, rebuilt their freeway system. They didn't add to it, they tore it up and rebuilt it. Now, they did that because the Olympics are coming. And by my eye, they have at least 20 years of excess growth capacity on their freeway system. Now, if the International Olympic Committee would come here and wave the magic wand, says you can have the Olympics in 2016, and we will rebuild completely your freeway system. Would we do it? In a heartbeat. Now let me expand that just a little bit. Why not have a binational Olympics? Mexico and the United States, but more specifically Tijuana and San Diego.
Great idea.
Okay, you know what happens in Olympics? There are venues on both sides of the border. The athletes, the press, the spectators have to get back and forth. You know what? If we had the Olympics here in 2016, I'll guarantee you we'll take care of our border problem way before then. And that's where I'm going, and that's exactly what I think we ought to do. Now, by the way, you may or may not know, Doctor, that it takes an average of an hour and a half coming north in your car from the south side of the border. Now we're getting to the real issue, and that's the fence. That's the fence between our two countries, the fence and the automobile portals called the gates. Let me start by asking a general question of all of you folks out there. What good does the fence and those portals do? What good? None. Law enforcement tell us that less than 10% of the illegals, people, drugs, merchandise, illegal anything, is stopped by the gates and the portals. Less than 10%. Why in the hell are we doing this to ourselves? So, my proposal, tear down America's Berlin Wall.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. I think your idea of a binational Olympics is brilliant. I think you should do it. I told these guys last night when I was in Buffalo, on the other side of the creativity index. And, you know, and this is why I found this conversation so appealing. They asked me, what's the future of Buffalo? And I said, well, it's Toronto. It's Tor-Buffchester. I think a region that would boldly embrace this binational construct would have enormous advantages. I think you're right. It is a Berlin Wall. I think you're right that it has to come down. I think Vicente Fox's whole idea of flows of people are much more important than flows of goods and services in the creative age. They're the key thing, and they're the thing we don't think about. We think about goods and services, but what made the United States great is, in fact, our ability. And let me tell you a story about a young Mexican-American. I spoke in Iowa, where Governor Vilsack wants to make Iowa the Ellis Island of the Midwest, which is a very interesting thing for Iowa. They were talking about attracting software developers and molecular biologists and all this, and a young Mexican-American guy got up and he said, you know what, Governor, I'm Mexican-American. Of the 6 people who graduated my college, Grinnell College, and stayed in the state of Iowa, all 6 of us are first-generation Mexican immigrants. We come from parents of Mexican Americans. We come from parents of Mexican stock. We decided to stay here. And his point was low-skill immigrants like my father and his father turn into high-skill immigrants as well. So I think that's really, really, really important. And I think your idea of the war on drugs is also important. Let me just build on a couple of concrete proposals. I grew up in the 60s. I grew up in a place that's one of the drug capitals of the United States. I've seen the toll that drugs can take on my peers. Why did my friends, the most creative and talented people I've ever met, more talented than the guys I went to college with, more talented than the people I teach with at Carnegie Mellon, the most talented group of people I've ever met, why did they fall victim to drugs? Because their creative potential wasn't tapped. How else were they going to spend their time? You know, taking drugs, having fun, selling drugs, being entrepreneurs. The reason they turned to drugs was because all of that other creative ability was blocked. So what you really have to do is open up the creative potential of people. Why does a kid do graffiti art? Because somebody's telling that kid, you're not a person. Well, I'm going to show you I'm a person. Why does a kid want to be a DJ? When I think what we have to do in our school systems is begin to tap the creative potential of every kid. If that kid wants to be a graffiti artist, tap into that potential and work with other graffiti artists and work with artists and show them the value of art. If that kid wants to be a DJ, why isn't there DJ 101 class in the high schools? Why did I have to play in my rock band after school? Why wasn't there Rock Band 101? That can lead kids to other kinds of creative inquiry, and it can stimulate them from being a DJ to being, in many cases, a much more serious musician. So I think that's where we have to go. And when I say every single human being is creative, I mean it. And the community that learns how to tap that potential and divert that waste of creative talent, dead-on waste of creative talent that goes to drugs and informal economy and criminal activity and a productive talent, is going to have a huge, not just a better way of life, it's going to have a huge competitive edge.
Hey, Rob, I've talked to a lot of artists and a lot of musicians throughout my reporting, and one thing I've come across is that everybody seems to agree that San Diego is very weak in arts, which makes me think, how can a city that ranks so high in your index be so weak in the arts? That's one part of my question. But also in comparison to Tijuana, since Tijuana is a lot more creative, a lot more innovative than San Diego as far as arts.
I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but it's where your question leads. I don't think the future of San Diego lies in having a better symphony than the Cleveland Orchestra, or a better ballet than the Joffrey, or better high art museums. I know that lots of people love that stuff, but you have an advantage that Cleveland and even New York and Boston don't have. You're close to Tijuana. You have this whole, what we would call world music, world art, I don't know what the right words are, but that's where you have an edge, and that's what people want. And you were saying, that artistic and cultural creativity that is right there in virtually your backyard can be tapped. I said this to the folks in San Jose when they lost their symphony. I said, stop crying in your beer. You got a great symphony in San Francisco, get your ass in your Mercedes and drive it up there. You got a Latino community and a Vietnamese community and an immigrant community of people from all over the world who have this incredible talent and connections, and Indian. I mean, a huge Asian Indian community with all of that dance and artistic and film heritage. Build on that. Differentiate yourself. Become something unique. You don't always have to do the same thing every other city did, and I think you're absolutely right. That if you can do that on an athletic front, and on an artistic and cultural front, that will also give you an edge in attracting people. Because, our culture is being Latinized for good. And I mean, J-Lo drives me crazy too, don't get me wrong. And Ricky Martin, I've seen enough of them. Fortunately, they're the East Coast. Well, anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the culture is being Latinized at a very powerful rate. And if you can distinguish San Diego, and there's all kinds of business opportunities. And you go into the business opportunities of filmmaking, of entertainment products, of record products, of DVDs. I mean, the one thing I want to say with thinking about arts and culture, please don't think that I'm making a case that you should just be artsy-fartsy. It's good to be artsy-fartsy. It's a net benefit to be artsy-fartsy. It'll attract people. But you really want to be like number 2 on the list, Austin. Every time they do something artsy, you know what they combine it with? $signs. South by Southwest Music, Film, and Interactive Festival. That isn't a big philanthropic event. That is a place where you bring bands together to do deals. Austin City Limits is a televised program that makes money for the community. You know what they did in Austin? They took the Office of Economic Development, and they created a new division, the Office of Creative Industry Development. Just think about that. Our music scene, our art scene, our interaction with other cultures, world music, whatever you call it, is all going to generate bottom line stuff. This isn't going to be philanthropic stuff alone. So in thinking about this relationship to Tijuana and to Mexico, about the cultural and the sports relationship, it's really important to think of that, of course, as a philanthropic and an ethical and a moral and the right thing to do, but I think it's even more important to think of it as an economically driven thing to do.
Thank you so much.